muted, Aparna. You are muted.
Okay, yeah, it's muted. Good evening, everybody, and a hearty welcome from the Women's History Conclave. We are here today to hear Professor Rekha Pande speak on opening doors, the first public school for girls in Hyderabad state. This is in the early 20th century. Now, let me briefly introduce Professor Rekha Pande. Professor Rekha Pande is a professor of history and women's studies. She was earlier the head of the Department of History and head Center for Women's Studies at the University of Hyderabad. She was also the director of Women's Studies and Women's Education at the Maulana Azad National Urdu University. She has been the founder director of two centers of women's studies, one at Maulana Azad National Urdu University and the other at the University of Hyderabad. She has 40 years of teaching experience. She has, to her credit, 28 books and approximately 200 papers in national and international journals, proceedings, and book chapters. She has guided 25 PhD and 46 MPhil students in both history and gender studies. She has executed and carried out planning and management, training, monitoring, and evaluation of 42 projects funded by different national and international funding agencies. She has been the editor of International Feminist Journal of Politics, which is published by the Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group, UK. She has also edited Foreign Policy Analysis, which is published by Blackwell, USA. She has received the Visiting Fellowship at the University of Birkbeck, University of London, UK, International Visiting Fellowship in the School of Polity Studies in the University of Bristol, UK. She was also the academic fellow at the University of Buffalo, USA, and international visiting scholar at Maison de Research, Paris, and visiting professorship at the University of Artois, France. She has been a member of the Feminist Jurisprudence Committee, National Commission for Women, and Core Advisory Group, and sensitization and capacity building towards eliminating child labor. Okay, I think this was a program of the government of Andhra Pradesh. She has been nominated as the Peace Ambassador for the South Asia region by the International Women's Peace Group, Korea, in 2016. For the last 1.5 decades, she has been an assessor for the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, and in this capacity, she has traveled all over India to assess different universities and colleges. She continues to be a member of the Board of Studies in both history and gender studies in a large number of universities in India, and also on the board of many national and international journals. She has traveled widely in India and abroad to deliver keynote addresses and lectures and to present papers at national and international conferences. She has been recently invited by the National Commission for Women to be its resource person for gender sensitization and gender development programs in India. Professor Rekha Pande is undeniably a stalwart in the fields of history, especially women's history and women's studies. It is our good fortune to have her with us today on this online platform. So, I request my co-convener, Dr. Bhashwati Chatterjee, to say a few words about this online event and also about our conclave. Bhashwati, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Aparna. Nothing. We should start now at instantly because everybody is waiting to hear Rekhadi. So thank you. Welcome Rekhadi and Jerry and all other who have joined today. We are privileged to have our esteemed audience today, and we hope that everybody we will enjoy your talk and we learn much more because you are such an experienced person as your bio note has already revealed. So thank you for accepting our invitation and to be the speaker of today's webinar. Thank you. Please start, Rekhadi.
Yes. So, Rekha,
Yeah.
the floor is now yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aparna and Baswati. It's always a pleasure coming back to you. I wanted to do a PowerPoint, but then I could hardly find any pictures. And I said, there is no point in speaking without pictures. So I'm just going to speak. And I hope my voice is clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, Rekha, perfectly clear.
Okay. So, the reason I became interested in this is we hear so much about, women's colleges being established, women going in for education. But we hardly, as a historian, we take it as a general fact. But what are the nitty gritties that go into it? What are the problems that were encountered? This is something we have hardly spoken about in history. And so, therefore, this is something which really interested me. And today we know for a fact that the education of girls is a very significant factor in modern India. And but what happened a century year ago, girls education had lot of enemies in India. And today, we have accepted this as a very important fact. But earlier there were so many challenges. The path was not easy. The system of parda, child marriage, parents were indifferent to education of their daughters. And when education was being introduced by the British, there was a lot of opposition to the Western system of girls' education. There was also a lot of financial pressure on the girls' family. And many families were not happy with the curricula that was being offered. There were hardly any girls' schools which were available. So, all these created a lot of challenges for girls' education. In fact, we had first the introduction of women's education in the three presidencies of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. And then, you had certain provinces where there were Christian missionaries and private individuals who took up this issue. But there was such a large gap between the men's and women's education because there was really an unequal access to facilities. And most of the communities in India, they viewed women's education as being unnecessarily. And especially, among a large section of people, and Muslims being no exception, they felt that the traditional form of education of girls was more than sufficient. Why do we need public schools for girls? Now, by the time you come to the end of 19th century, the whole discussion on education of girls was settled in favor of schools because they felt this was the most effective way to expand education. And the girls could be in parda, the overall atmosphere of respectability could be maintained with high compound walls, boarding schools, etc. And now, there was a new debate which occurred as to what kind of education should the girls be given. And there was a lot of emphasis saying that, girls have to be future mothers, wives, and we need an education that will help in this role. Now, prior to 20th century, we find that education, especially for the Muslim girls, was very minimal. It was only a religious education that was restricted to the Zanana quarters, and there were a lot of restrictions on parda. Many of the elite Muslim families, they were very much influenced by the reforms in Bombay and Calcutta. They started advocating for modern women's education. And this, in this broad debate, Hyderabad was also brought in. Now, what happened in among the Muslim community because of the failure of the revolt of 1857? There was a lot of soul searching, and many felt that the traditional education had not equipped them for either employment or to deal with this new society, and there was slowly a shift towards being more receptive to a Western education. Syed Ahmad Khan, who spearheaded the modernist movement, he advocated a lot for Western education among the Muslims so that they could get jobs in the government and other professions. However, again, having said that, he felt that education for women was premature and it should only be taken up after the boys were educated. So, by and large, if you look at this period, we find that women were primarily viewed as repositories of tradition, culture, and morality. And they felt that, only the traditional education could give them good morals so that they could be good wives and mothers. There was a lot of emphasis on the study of Quran, Hadith, and occasional poetry and a little amount of history. But by and large, we find that they felt that, this kind of religious education would also give them modernity and it would also help in preserving their communal identity. Now, my whole talk is based on the memoirs of Fanny Wild and what she has written about the first school for girls in Hyderabad. Now let me give you a little background how I came about this research. And please tell me when I'm not audible, because I'm speaking behind a laptop and I don't know when I suddenly become inaudible. Okay. So I had gone to Maulana Azad Urdu University as the director of women's studies on sabbatical. And it was in 2004 that, we were doing a study of madrasas in Hyderabad, girls' madrasas. And I came across a reference of Fanny Wild. And from that time onwards, I was desperately looking if I could get some more information. Unfortunately, till today, I have still not discovered any photograph of hers. There is hardly any other information which I could get. I had, visited so many libraries and found that her memoirs were never published. What happened from 2004, this was somewhere, at the back of my mind. In 2019, I got a fellowship to the University of London in Birkbeck. And I spent a lot of time, we were working on religious reform movement. And so I hardly got time to look at this. Then, just 3 days before I was to leave for India, I went to the university and my contact, Rebecca Dale, was teaching there. And I went to just tell her goodbye. And I think in our conversation, I just mentioned that, I was looking for one autobiography and I could not find it. She asked me the details and, in her mobile, she quickly pressed some buttons. And then, after 10 minutes, she tells me, Rekha, go to the British Library tomorrow and at about 12:30, you will find this manuscript. I could not believe my ears. And let me tell you a little about the British Library. In the British Library, they have catalogued all the records into 3 colors. First is the yellow, which these are, very precious, old records. Many of them are being destroyed. The greens are, which have been checked, updated. And then the blue ones are those, where they are awaiting provisional, they are awaiting further cataloging. And what they do, they have 3 kinds of tables over there. One is the yellow table, which means that these documents are very precious. You cannot take photographs or you can only take notes on your laptop. And you can't even click a picture from your mobile. And when you leave that, if you have to even take a toilet break, you have to return that manuscript to the people who are sitting there issuing these manuscripts, and they will keep your library card with them, and when you come back you again take that document. So it's a very precious document. The green table meant that you could take pictures from your mobile, and you could carry a pencil. In the yellow table you can't even carry a pen, and in the blue table you could take notes, you could take pen, you could carry pictures. And when I reached the library at about 12:31, after some time I was handed over a basket, and in that there were about 450 pages. They were really withered, falling, and it was very much yellow in color. And what was really interesting, I think in my excitement, I did not even carry my laptop there. So, like a fool, I was sitting with this basket of papers in front of me, not knowing what to do. I had no laptop, nothing. I could not even carry a pen or something. And I just kept looking at that document, turning pages. But then, I had to finally return it. And I said that I will take it the next day. The next day I was mind you, I was leaving after this, the on the third day at night. I stood before the library at 9:30 and got this document. And you won't believe, from 9:30 till the time the library closed in the evening, I just sat and made notes like mad, which was there. And what I'm speaking is basically based on these accounts called Mehboobiya and In My India. That's the title. Now, it's very interesting that Fanny Wild wrote her memoirs when she was 92 years old. She had become blind, but then she taught herself to touch type at the age of 90. And she died at the age of 96 in 1974. But as you read her memoirs, these typed copies, you are struck by what memory a person can have at the age of 92. Amazing, her gift of expression, her skill at recording the details. Unfortunately, after 2019, I could not go back to London, but I have to go back to finish the other part of this memoir. I could only take notes for more than half of this. Fanny Wild was born in 1878. She was the third girl in a family of 8 members. Her father was Calriff Wild. And, money was very scarce in their family, so she had very little schooling. But then her grandmother left her a small legacy, and she could go to St. Hugh in Oxford. This was the first women's college in Oxford at that time. But it is very interesting that though she qualified this degree, in those days, no degrees were awarded to women. And therefore, she never got this degree. She got this degree 20 years later. And in this period, we are talking about this period where there was, hardly any money in teaching. Teaching posts were very badly paid. And we find that, therefore, she could not really get a teaching job. She spent her time at Madame Bergman, Austenberg's physical training college. She became a physiotherapist, which was the nearest career possible to a doctor. Now, it was very interesting that one day she was asked by a wife of an English officer in the government of India, state of Hyderabad in Deccan, that would she be able to help them find a principal for a girls' school in Hyderabad. And, in her memoirs, Fanny Wild does not give the name of this lady. She just calls her Mrs. X. And she says that, she started asking Mrs. X that, please give me some, before I get you a principal and she even wanted 3 more teachers. She says, please give me some information about this school. She said, no, it's a nice school. There are girls over there, but please get me a principal. She hardly gave her any information on that schools. And at that time, many girls from respectable families were not seen as being good in searching a job for themselves. They were though they were going to schools, by and large, at the most they could become a governess in some home. And it was very difficult for her to find a person who would go. But then, she decided to chart this unknown territory. She kept, whomever she started interviewing for this position, they wanted to obviously know about the school. India is so far off from London. They wanted to know where is the school, how big was it. She only said the only information she had, that they would be given a good salary. Even how much salary she was not able to say, and they would be given 1 month leave to come back, and their passage would be taken care of. Now this was not enough for many parents, and finally Fannyville decided that she will offer herself as a principal to that school. She had lots of responsibility at home. But now, when this was happening somewhere in 1908, we find that her younger sister had also taken a job in Salisbury, and her younger brother was 16 years of age. And therefore, she felt that she could now easily afford to travel to India. Mrs. X was more than happy, saying that Fanny Wild had accepted this job. And it was on in 1909 that Fanny Wild landed in Hyderabad. And if you read her memoirs, she talks about how difficult it was for an unmarried woman in a foreign land. They had only heard about India as a country, but it was a totally alien country. Its culture, climate, language, everything did not make sense to them. But then again, if you read her memoir, her love for that school, really spans more than 100 pages. And she talks so much about the school, fairs, festival, transport, disease, health. She talks a lot about the Notch parties, Parda. She even mentioned the flood in Musi, which happened in 1908. The school had started in 1907. And she also talks about, Sikandarabad Club, which is again today a very famous club in Hyderabad, and how the army officers found it was a very important place for army officers. Now, when Fanny Wild came to Hyderabad, she had envisaged the school much along the lines in England. And she said the only difference would be that the girls would be Indian. Instead of English girls, I will be having Indian girls. And then, she also knew that many of these girls lived in Parda, and but they belonged to very high sections of society. Besides this, she knew nothing about this. She had tried to get so many questions, but she got no answer to these. And finally, she convinced herself, saying that, okay, once I reach India, maybe I'll get some more information on this school. And finally, she was able to recruit 3 other teachers. One was a mathematics teacher, another a kindergarten, and the third for music. And she immediately realized, it was a big mistake to employ a teacher in music, because, the lady knew only English music, and the girls in Hyderabad had nothing to do with the English music. And we find that the only information they had about India was that, there is an army cantonment there. There are lots of army officers who are going there. And, always Fanny Wild had been very independent, though she belonged to a large family. It was not a very well-to-do family, but she had become a law unto herself. She managed her brothers and sisters. She had been a very independent person. She took decisions for herself. And, a young 30 years old, 31 years old women now reaching India. Now, what we find is that she had it took 3 weeks. The voyage from London to India took 3 weeks, and the ship landed in Bombay. There she met Mrs. X, who was supposed to tell her a lot about the school. And the first thing Mrs. X said, I am leaving. The moment this ship was traveling back to London, and she said that, look, I have to leave by this ship back to London. From Bombay, it was about 1.5 day by train, and then they arrived at Begumpet station on a Saturday afternoon. The date was October 9th, 1909, and it is from here that Fanny Wills' adventure started. Now, in Hyderabad, in the waiting room, as soon as they got down from the train, there was a Mrs. Hayadri who was waiting for these four young women. And Mrs. Hayadri was, though she also belonged to the Begum's family of Hyderabad, she did not observe Parda. And again, a big shock came to Fanny Will, because she always thought that she will be staying with Mrs. X. Close by, they will be staying, and she would get a lot of help from Mrs. X. But Mrs. X had told her that she's going back to London, and it was also informed by Mrs. Hayadri that they would be staying somewhere, Chadar Ghat, which was very much away from where Mrs. X stayed. And then, they even didn't know how to reach that place. They found a carriage, and after driving for some miles, she talks about, they saw a huge tank of water. And finally, they came to a house where they met a Miss N, whom she says is the housekeeper. And she said that she would be living in the school, and she would take care of their meals. There were also some, she was an Eurasian, or who were later on known as Anglo-Indians in India. They also had an ayah called Gangubai, who was to be their personal ayah. Now, we find that again she met another lady, Sorby, Mrs. Sorby in Sikandrabad. And when, Mrs. Sorby was also involved with the earlier school. But then, she came and told them that, she also has to leave for England, and therefore she will be leaving by the evening train. See, Mrs. X was also going back, and Mrs. Sorby, who was her other contact, was also going back to London. And then, Mrs. Sorby said that, look, I was never the principal, but the last principal, who is known as Mrs. Jeffrey, was a very good friend of mine, but she got married and left for England. And therefore, they were looking for a new principal. And then, then Mrs. Fannyveld asked her, she said, who will but hand over the school to me? So, Mrs. Sorby looks at her and says, what is there? There's nothing to hand over. In her mind, she had come, there would be register, there would be books, there would be accounts, there would be fees. She says, I was in for a surprise, because she said there's nothing to be handed over. And what we find that, Mrs. Wild found out that there was nothing much that she could get out of Sorby. And finally, it was, she just agreed. She felt that, there was nothing much she could do. Mrs. Sorby also left. Mrs. X also left. And she is left all alone. The other question she asked is, do these girls speak English? And, they said, look, I don't know. She also wanted to know what about their religion. But then she got that she didn't get any answers to these. Then she said, but definitely there must be a list of these girls who come to school. There must be some accounts. There must be some fees which these girls must have paid. But then, Mrs. Sorby turns around and says, I don't think there is any list which is there. Now, she started wondering that, is she landing into some kind of a chaos? There was nothing that she could do. And finally, she says, okay, she really felt very disheartened. And she shared this with the other three friends, and they said, okay, tomorrow let's go to the school. They were the whole evening, they landed, they were very disheartened, they were very depressed as to what they had come here. And this is how she started as the principal of that school. Now, another very interesting thing is, she asked Mrs. Sorby, saying that, what about the accounts? And then Mrs. Sorby told her, she said, look, I used to get lot of letters from the accountant general. He kept asking me about accounts, and I grew so tiresome out of this. After some time, I just tore away all these letters which I received from them. And she says, I have nothing to do with accounts. They just, I didn't want to be bothered. So that was the answer she got. And this was, Mrs. Will became so desperate. She saw a lot of endless troubles ahead of her. And she felt that it was something very unreasonable that she had come into this place. It was very difficult. And she found the weather so, none of the people could understand her language. She found the weather so hot. And imagine, this is October. She was not even in Hyderabad in, February, March, or April, when it really gets hot. October is very pleasant, but she found it very, the weather very bad. And finally, next morning, they all go to see the school. Now, what she says, the school was not like a bungalow. It was a huge building. There was one large central room, which was like a small assembly hall. It had huge high ceilings, and the doors opened towards outside. On, both ends, there were doors. There was a veranda in the front side, which was shut, most probably because of parda restrictions. And they had a screen of about 6 to 8 inches to cover them. And at the back of this building was a small room with two crescent shaped rooms. And there was a kind of a very narrow winding staircase which would go to the upper deck, where they had another room. And because, the building was perched on a kind of a mount, it was known as Mount Charles at that time. And there were huge folding doors on both ends. She says, at least we felt a little happy seeing that school building. And there was, some little furniture there. There were 4 low double desks. And there was a table with in a very deserted place. And it continued to be deserted for a long time. Now, she says, I had to take back my 3 companions whom she had brought from London. And she said, I had to cheer them. And I didn't really know how to cheer them. And the only way I could think of was, let's go to the Sikandrabad club and socialize a little. So they all went to Sikandrabad club. And again, she says that, it was a very bad experience, because the only men whom she met there were all army officers. These were all British officers who were coming there for an entertainment, and their wives with them. These were the only women who were unmarried. And she says, the kind of talk which the wives were making, she says, I didn't find it interesting at all. But anyway, the next morning, all these 4 women marched off to the school at 8:30. And the Aya Gangubai was asked to take charge of the parda. And on the first day, Khadija Begum arrived. Khadija Begum could speak good English, and she explained to them many of the things regarding parda, etc. And she found that, in India, the only schools which Indian girls had attended were those run by missionaries. But by and large, only coolie children were attending here. And then, Khatija Begum promised that if you start the school, and you get more and more girl students, I will definitely help you from my side. And we find that the Zanana school, as she calls it, uh, she was surprised to know that this was not just the first school which she had started in Hyderabad, but the first school in India for girls, where girls would come up. And we find that the reason she says that this is the first school in India, because the Sharif Zats, girls, girls from noble family were coming to this. And we find that the first day, they all stood there. And she said there were no lavatories in that building. There was just a little winding staircase. And when she, after some time, when she wrote to the administration saying that there are no lavatories, they said, but the girls are not staying there. Why do you need lavatories? And it was so difficult. After 4 or 5 months, she was able to convince them that yes, we need a lavatory. And below the staircase they had to put pardas all around. And they managed to get some kind of a contraption, she says, which was cleaned by the sweepers. These were the only kinds of lavatories that were there. She was horrified looking at this, but this was only something which was available in India at that time. But she says, it was like a makeshift lavatory, but this was the only thing she could get. And then she was also there was again, she found slowly that whenever she wrote a letter to the administration, to the British officials, she would think that she would get a letter in 2 3 days time, and she would get a reply. But months would go on, nobody bothered to reply. It was very frustrating, because then she realized that she's not going to get any reply. And it was she learned that whatever she has to do, she has to do on her own. She wrote a letter for the lavatory. She kept waiting 3 4 months, there was no answer, and finally she had to start her own lavatory. Another major issue which she faced was that the students who tickled in on the first day, they were not of the same age. And how would she teach them, because they all belong to different age groups, they were different level. She says that Leela and Marian Haidari, one, Leela was 9 years old, Marian Haidari was 8 years old, they were cousins. They could speak a little in English, few broken words, but they didn't know how to write. The other two girls, Vilayat and Akhtari, were daughters of Mumtazud Dawla. They could only understand a little English. They could not even speak, and they could not even write. The other two who came, Rafatunisa and Yusufunisa, were sisters, but they knew not a single word of English. Their language was Urdu, and they could only read and write in Urdu. So these were the first 6 girls that came to the school. And then, when these girls landed in school, she was faced with the problem of, how do we deal with parda? And, there would be a sayas who would come in the carriage. He would stop at a certain place. Then, he would immediately get up and hide himself behind the carriage. He would make a sound saying that the carriage has come. Then this Gangubai and another servant, they would bring a big chadar from the entrance gate till the carriage. It would be covered on both sides. And once, there was a sheet which was provided covering the pathway. Then they would open the carriage door, and these girls would get down and walk to the school. And we find that Fannyville is very much disturbed by the parda. She says that, these poor girls didn't know any other life. There was, they knew that, once they are at a marriageable age, they would be married to a husband of their father's choice. And from that time, they would, from one seclusion, they would move into the other. They had not even seen the outside world. She realized that, life was so different from England for these girls. In fact, she had taken a lot of things for granted in early childhood, and these girls knew nothing about it. She says that they had no idea about nature or animal life. She said that most probably I could teach children about animals or nature from pictures. But then she says that, a picture is very flatless, it is lifeless. How do I teach these children about animal? She says, if I talk about a meadow or a cow grazing in it or a stream running through it, how do I explain to these 6 girls unless they see it with their own eyes? And there was no question of them even going out and seeing anything. She also remarks a very interesting aspect, that there was a huge flood in Musi River in Hyderabad in 1908. Fanny Wild had reached Hyderabad in 1909. And this is known as, even if today records call it as the Tungyani Sitambar in Hyderabadi records, it shattered the life of people in and around Hyderabad. More than 50,000 people lost their lives. There were 3 bridges that connected Hyderabad from different places: the Afzal, the Musalman Jung, and the Chadar Ghat bridge. They were, the popular links between the 2 ports. And the flood, converted the whole city into a grave. The streets, the basements were all transformed into a gruesome mass of stone, mud, and decomposed flesh. And there were more than 600 corpses which were taken out from mud. It was, the she also said that the funeral pyres kept burning day and night. She is quoting from a report. She was obviously not present during the flood, but she quotes from a report of Angeles Herald, one of the Los Angeles Herald, one of the newspapers. And she says that, more than 2 lakh crore rupees was the damage which was caused. But it is very interesting that, Fanny Wills give a gender dimension to the floods. She says that, when the Musi River flooded, it flowed close to the wall and it burst the city in its bank. And at that time, then it started surging through the streets into the houses. And she says much more number of women died in these floods than and the reason for this was that the women had not even seen the outside street. And when the water gushed into their house, suddenly they were out in the open. They didn't even recognize these streets. They didn't even know. And it was something which she says it was so sad. And I mean, this is the lives which many of these women lived in Hyderabad at that time. She also wanted to bring some knowledge about the outside world to the children. But then, what is the common language which they must use? She knew that they had to learn to read and write in English. She would teach them English the same way that small children learn in England. And she said that, they must learn by copying each other. She would keep repeating these words. She would show them objects like table and say, this is a table. She kept repeating it till these girls repeated. Then she would say, this is a chair. And she would use words like I sit and show them to sit. I sat, I ran. And then, when the girls would perform these activities, they were so thrilled that they picked up English slowly like this. And again, she would do a lot of acting with this, and she would slowly make them talk and they learned. She made a lot of arrangements for the parda. She kept to it that the parda was maintained. There is another very interesting incident which she talks about in her memoir. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, Rekha, perfectly audible.
Okay. I don't know when. So, another very interesting incident which she records in her memoirs is that, suddenly correspondence increased so much. See, with the Hyderabad administration, she had to write in Urdu. With the British administration, she had to correspond in English. So she started telling them that, look, I need a clerk who can help me with Urdu and who knows a little English. And one day, finally, after 4 5 months, she finds a person who comes and says that he has been sent to be the secretary. And she is, talks to him very nicely, to this Babu. And she says, what have you studied? And he says, I am BA fail. So, then Fanny will says, oh, I'm so sorry that you are BA failed, and I hope you will pass soon. But then she realizes that, she had done such a foolish mistake. This man he felt very offended that this was the statement Fanny Will was making. In those days, the very fact that he had appeared for a BA was creditable. It didn't matter whether he passed or failed. So, even he called himself a BA failed, and that itself was a big degree at that time. And she says, by no flight of imagination could I think that this was a degree. But then, some of the difficulties which she talks in her memoir is, that one of the greatest difficulties in the Parda household is they have no concept of time. And it was, their life came up when the sun arose, when the sun when it was, it was dusk, and at dawn, their life started, and when it was dusk they would go back. And though the school would start at 9 o'clock and it would finish at 4, she tried to keep time, but it was so difficult. Some days the two girls would reach at 11 o'clock, another day they would reach at 12 o'clock, some would come at 1 o'clock. And it was, very difficult for her to try to manage the time. And finally, she tried to, explain to the children that, timing is very important. They have to be, they have to put pressure on their mothers and families to send them. If the father wanted the carriage, he wanted the sahas, that became more important. The sahas had to go drop the father, and when he would come back, then at any time he would come and pick up the girls. But slowly, she says, over the years, she insisted, and she said that she made the girls say that, if they are late, they will have to write in English and give the reason why they are late. Now, this was very difficult, and she says that, I'm feeling really sad that I threw away that notebook. I didn't bring it with me to England. But there were so many excuses the girls would write, like saying, my size, belly ache, my mother not got up, my father went office. These kinds of little entries were there as to why these girls were late. Another major complication that she had to face was dealing with these girls' ayahs. There were only 6 of these girls. Now, all these ayahs, these were women from very high educated families. They had a good social standing, and they always had 2 3 ayahs with them for constant guidance. And these ayahs were a law to themselves. In fact, whenever, a book would drop, 3 ayahs would come running, pick it up, and then take them. If the girls were, asked to move from one room to another, the ayahs would come first, and then they would take them. So, she says her biggest difficulty was, how does she get rid of these ayahs? And how does she convince them that their wards are safe in her charge? This was a big task she had. Finally, what she did, there was a godown there. She emptied it. She had parda around it. And she said, all the ayahs can sit here and gossip and talk and have time. I will take care of the children. It was very difficult for the ayahs to give up initially, but she says slowly she was able to draw the girls away from the ayahs. Another major thing was that, most of the girls these girls were much older than their counterparts in England. And she kept saying that, how does she teach them? She said, imagine if, you are going upstairs and you have 3 of your ayahs carrying your books. poor, can you imagine if I ask Gangubai to run whole day, how would it be? Can't we carry our own books? She slowly started talking to the girls. And finally, once the ayahs were not there, the girls picked up their books, they started walking, they started picking up their bags and going. And she says soon these girls even forgot that they had ayahs. And slowly, she says things like, earlier if you had to just move a blackboard, earlier there was no way these girls would even lift a finger to do any work. They would just come and sit, and the ayahs would do all the running around. But now, when the board has to be moved, these girls came forward and they started moving the boards. She said they were so shy, girls who are 6 and 9, that they didn't even know how to play. So she brings in a shuttlecock and a shuttle, and tells them that, two girls, Rafatunisa and Yusufunisa, they hide behind a board, and she shows them how you hit a shuttlecock. And finally she's with lot of they are so shy, they have never picked a racket. And finally, these girls hit the shuttle behind the board. And Fanny Will says, I don't know what games today girls are playing in the Zanana school, but I'm sure that Rafatunisa and Yusufunisa were the first two women players in India. Another very important challenge which she had to face was that, they had kept a school fees. And this was something, which was very difficult to get. These families were very rich, the money really didn't matter. But then, they were so careless, they didn't even pay the fees on time. They could not, girls education was not taken seriously. They had to, she had to keep sending reminders, and that, they were doing this work and they needed some payment. And finally, it was with great difficulty that she could convince the parents that, they had to pay the fees and pay it on time. But she says that, and then, she started maintaining registers, keeping their names. And she says it took a lot of time to convince the parents that, they had to pay a school fees. She says that the younger children wore English dresses, but with very attractive caps, which were called smoking caps. There were a lot of gay decoration, lot of it would jingle, make so much noise all around. But once these girls became 9 or 10 years old, they would start wearing saris. She talks about the beautiful silk, the beautiful colors. But another major problem was they would come decked with so much jewelry. Now, this was a big problem. Their hands would be filled. They would wear 5 or 10 necklaces. And it was something, that she found it very difficult. The ayahs, could not accept that the girls did not have to wear jewelry. They kept arguing, saying that, no, it is their status symbol. They have to wear this. And finally, she says after a lot of persuasion, more than 6-7 months, she was able to convince the girls that they should come without jewelry. She said they kept coming with lot of these colorful bangles. They kept making a lot of noise, but she said that is much better than the earlier jewelry which they were wearing. Another major challenge she had was that she says that, in England, the children of their age had to learn only one language, English. But here, the girls had to learn two languages. And what was very difficult was, English was written from left to right, and Urdu was written from right to left. These young girls, they were getting so confused, but how do you teach them to write a different script, different language? But anyway, she worked a lot, and they had to, be left. They had to read the Quran in between. A lot of time was kept for this, and Fanny Will kept herself away, and she allowed all that. Another big challenge which she had was that, she says in a hot country like India and Hyderabad, everyone gets thirsty. And she had to provide water for these girls. But she says that, she was not sure about the water they were getting in the pot. So she insisted that the water has to be boiled. And this boiled water must be available to the children the whole day. So this Sakina Bi, another ayah who was there, that was her responsibility, that before the children came, she would boil the water and then keep it. And she had to give a report every day to Fanny Wild. And she says, she would come and tell her, Pani obuling Miss Ma. That's the language. She would use a mixture of pani, ubal raha hai, water is boiling. She'll say, Pani obuling Miss Ma. And she would come and give her this report every day, but they would have water. It was not that easy, though. Now more than 8-9 months had passed. She found a lot of enemies of the school also. Mehboob Ali Khan, who was the Nizam, and everyone trusted him, loved him. He was a great, he was in favor of the school. He suddenly died on 29th August 1911. And then, he was succeeded by Mir Usman Ali Khan. Now, Mir Osman Ali Khan had a totally different personality. He was very autocratic at time, but then he had a group of courtiers, and he would listen to them a lot. So there were a lot of enemies of girls' education. This was still about 1911, and 2 years had passed, and it was so difficult to continue with the school, and finally. Many of them came and reported to the Nizam that girls are being educated in that school. They don't follow Parda. They are ignoring Parda. And she says that, finally she had to convince the Nizam that, if he had any doubts, he can come and visit himself and see that they were following the Parda. She says she found a lot of help in the Prime Minister, Sir Nawab Mir Yusuf Ali Khan, whom we know as Salar Jung III. He was always a good friend, and he was able to convince the Nizam. Finally, Nizam changed his mind. He was bent upon closing the school, but he continued. And he says that another major issue which he had to be tackled, because few Hindu girls were also coming. Beef was repulsive to Hindus and pork to the Muslims. And how they were providing food to these girls. And then she says, I learned and I taught my ayah so many concoctions of chicken, and they decided that they are only going to serve chicken. One of the major problems which Mrs. Wild had, and she keeps talking about it, that she lacked any social life. She had no companion. I had already mentioned Sikandrabad Club was the only place, and there, she was not at all comfortable. And she said that I could invite these women to my homes, but they didn't have any money. Their bungalow was also falling apart, and they did not have any money to invest. She says, so how could I entertain? If I go to people's house, these British ladies' houses, then I also had to invite them to my houses to entertain. And slowly, she got a tennis court made, and they would play tennis in that court in the evening. It was very interesting that after 2-3 years, the girls took Cambridge local preliminary, and the authorities thought all of them would fail. And much to their surprise, these 7-8 girls who were there, all of them passed this exam. The authorities were really surprised. Two other interesting things which she talks about is that they decided to have a Christmas celebration, and they made elaborate arrangements. And they, next morning, after the Christmas celebration was over, they got a big letter from the Nawab saying that there was a man who was there in that Christmas party, and they could see the girls running around this man. How could a man enter? And it took her a lot of time. Finally, Khadija Begum had to go to the Nawab and explain him the concept of Father Christmas. It was a women teacher who had dressed up as Father Christmas, and it was not a male. Another very interesting incident which she talks about is they decided to have an annual prize giving ceremony. She had taught the girls a small Shakespeare play. They enacted this play. They had made arrangements for 40 guests, the mothers of all these women who would come, and they had made elaborate arrangement. And they had decorated the tables, lot of food was kept. But she says, while the girls and mothers were busy in the play, the teachers also busy. Suddenly the ayahs got hungry. They all came, and all that food which was laid for the guests, they all ate it. They made that whole place dirty. Tablecloths were dirty. And then, once she comes in to see, and she is in for a shock. But quickly they had to make arrangement, clean it, and, lay another table. Fanny will slowly purchases a car. She becomes a very important person now, a familiar sight in Hyderabad, going around the car. She also becomes very important part of family. She gets invited to a lot of Muslim families where, she sees all these women. She talks about the Zanana, their rich jewelry. They always wore diamond, pearls, and gold. And she talks about, saying that there is so much illness in the Parda homes. She says seclusion did not allow them healthy living. They had lot of TV and lot of malaria, which was there. One of her favorite students, she liked all the girls, but she says a beautiful girl called Fakrunisa. She had lovely red hair, and which was auburn, and she was called Lal Shehzadi because of that, the red princess. She was age 13. And then, one day she did not come to school for nearly 8-9 days. Then she's informed that she's ill. So Fanny Will decides to go. First, she had to seek permission from the family. And then she asked she goes there. She asked the Nizam, not the Nizam, she asked the girls, Fakrunisa's father, if she can bring a doctor. And he refuses. The girl, he says, no, there is a Ved who's treating. And in those days in Hyderabad, how they would treat, the girl would sit inside behind a parda, the Unani Hakim would sit outside. So what they would do, they would take a handkerchief, soak it in water, she would touch it with a hand, and then by smelling this handkerchief, the Unani Ved would decide on the treatment for the girl. So, she's not at all convinced that this would help. She says she begged the father to let her see a doctor. And she would take her to a Zanana hospital, but she says this was rejected. And she says, she writes, she says, it was a very sad day for me that there was no doctor. 2 nights passed, and finally Fakrunisa died. And she then talks about, there is a plague in Hyderabad in 1912, and there is so much death in that family. So I know I've taken a lot of time. I would just conclude by saying that, Fanny Will left Hyderabad in 1990. By this time, when she left Hyderabad, Mehboobiya School, as the Zanana school came to be known, it had more than 100 students. By 1930s, there were 79 schools in Hyderabad, and the Muslim students were twice the number of the Hindu students. 22% of these girls were in government high schools. They made a lot of dent in education, especially for the upper elite. And though, many were not in favor of girls' education, there were so many challenges, and they had to face so many problems. And yet, Fanny Will writes that she's so happy that she was able to achieve this when she left for England. This is only half the auto memoir which I finished. Thank you very much for patient listening.
Thank you, Rekha. This was so intriguing. Really exciting. This journey of Fanny Bill to India, and the challenges she faced, the difficult weather conditions, and all the lofty expectations she initially had, and how those came crashing to the ground, and how eventually she built this school. So this is extremely, this is very, very interesting and intriguing. And also, this school was founded in which year, Rekha? Was it before?
It was started in 1907. Fanny Will.
Okay, so this was before. Okay, yeah. So this was before Rokia Sakwat Hussain built the Sakwat Memorial School in Kolkata, right?
Yeah. So 1907 it started. It started in 1907, but then Fanny Will comes in 1909, and she is the one who really starts it. There was nothing much, as I explained earlier. So she says, no, this is the first school for girls in India.
Was this the first school for Muslim girls in Hyderabad?
Definitely. All over
I mean,
India,
this was
she
not the first
says,
school for girls in India, right? Because we have Bethune School, which was founded in 1849, and there were several schools founded by missionaries even before 1849. But was this the first school for Muslim women in Hyderabad?
yeah, the reason she says this is the first school, the schools which had come earlier, if all of us know who are, dealing with education, you didn't have upper caste girls coming into these schools. Most of them came from the other sections of society, but here were the elite women, the noblemen and all whose daughters came to the school. So, in that sense, for the elite girls who had never come out of Parda, a school for girls. In that sense, she says it's the first school in India. In Hyderabad,
So,
yes, definitely the first
yes.
one.
Did she visit Calcutta during her stay in India? Did she ever go to Calcutta?
I really don't know because I told you I read only half the memoirs. Other half
So
I can
please,
go back.
please go back to London and read the other half. We'll be eagerly waiting, waiting to hear the rest of the story. This is really really interesting, and and you are a very good storyteller, Rekha.
Nay, and what intrigued me that, why has it not been published? It is
Yeah.
still in that tatters. It will fall apart any day. I wish they published this memoir.
No,
I
it
don't know.
should be published.
For
And
girls'
there
education.
was there was this belief that young unmarried women would come to India. I mean, from England and other parts of Europe, they would be visiting India in search of husbands. So, did Fanny find a husband in India?
No, she didn't. But what is very interesting, I didn't go into those details because I focused only on education. Her other two, those two teachers also left finally because one of them found the same man. Two of them found men whom they married and they went back to England and all that. But Fanny Will just went back.
So, I mean, okay. So, she remained unmarried till her death. Okay, okay, okay. Okay. So, this is very, very
I hope
interesting.
they
And
remain unmarried because from whatever I read, this is the impression I got. I don't know. Like I said, this is only half. Since I was so
yeah.
excited about this is only half the memoir. I don't know in the other half what happens.
So you really landed up in a gold mine. I mean, this is really a gold mine. I mean, this autobiography, this is really very, very precious, and it should be published. So, is there any question from the audience? If you have a question, please unmute yourself and raise your hand. Yes, Mukhopadhyay has raised her hand.
Yeah,
Shukapa,
introduce
okay,
yourself.
please.
Yes, thank you, Rekadi, for your insightful and informative lecture. It's so intriguing, really. I have a question. Were there any significant differences between educational opportunities for Muslim and Hindu women in Hyderabad in early 20th century? Did you get anything like that?
See,
Or
this depends
linguistic
on later on. See, her
disadvantages?
school starts with the Muslim girls, but
Yeah.
later on you had lot of Hindus, especially these were, girls of the higher officials who were working in the
Yeah.
Nizam's court and all. They also come and join in. So you do have
But
these girls who come in.
linguistic disadvantages were not there. What do you think? Linguistic disadvantages can be there for Urdu and English only, no?
They definitely, but see what happened. The official language in Hyderabad that time is Urdu. Whether they are Hindu girls or Muslim girls, they are all learning Urdu.
Okay.
So only English was a challenge. Urdu, all of them knew, they were taught, they could read and write and all. So it didn't matter whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim, Urdu was the language that had to be used.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Sure, Tapatidi.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Pandey, for this very interesting presentation. You have really delved into a gold mine. There is no doubt about it. My questions are, Uh, I have more than one question. The first question is, what was the curriculum like?
Mm.
Any idea of the curriculum? What were the subjects taught?
See, I didn't get an idea about the curriculum as such, but from what I could, understand, they had three teachers who were appointed. One is for mathematics. Obviously, they were taught mathematics. One in kindergarten, so alphabets and all. They were taught to read and write in English, speak that. And third, she says music, but then she says it was of no use. But she teaches them some songs, etc. And soon the music teacher leaves, and then they have. So I mean, based on that, this is only a guess I am making, but definitely they, in between, they were also taught the Quran. So you had other teachers who come, maybe the gents who would come, or the girls who would be, because that is something which is not clear. But they had Quran lessons, they learned the other prayers, etc. She had to leave them alone at that time. So obviously this is there. And then, like, she brings in, she devised a lot of games, brought in pictures, told them a lot about England. So she raises their curiosity about the world outside. That is something which is very interesting. So I don't know, I wish one could get the, I was so excited only with the half the manuscript, that I really wanted to speak about this. Yeah.
And the other two questions are very simple. The thing is that does she mention Mrs. Akbar Haidari, Mrs. Amina Haidari, who had received her at the station? Because Amina Haidari played a very important role in women's education in Hyderabad, and so did her husband, Sir Akbar Haidari. Later on, I think the school was taken over by it really became a public school, and Sir Akbar Haidari became a big patron of the school. Any idea if does she talk about the personality she made there? Because Sarojini Naidu was also there at that time at Hyderabad. Does she by any chance mention these names?
Yeah, see, I didn't go into that, but yes, she mentioned, the only women she could talk to was Hyderabad, because she knew English. She would come, and she keeps talking about her. She is like a great friend. She would often visit the school. And another thing she mentions very importantly, that the Hyderis had become very poor by that time. They didn't, though they had a very good name, they had a very high status, but financially they were not doing so well. But then she found a lot of support. In fact, she even mentions Sarojini Naidu. She finds support in Sarojini Naidu also for the school. See, slowly, there is a long list of friends whom she gathers. Some of them are these women, local and others. And she talks in very glowing terms about them. Definitely, she found a lot of support in them. They
And
helped her a lot.
and the other question is, I have a very faint memory about a school being founded by Salar Jung, who was the prime minister, or the prime minister of Hyderabad at that time. Salar Jung one. He founded a girls' school in 1882. You have any idea about that?
No, that I really didn't read much. I'm just talking about this public school. Maybe I'll find out, you're saying I should look into it.
And there were one or
But
two missionary schools as well.
maybe missionary schools would have been there. But see, the biggest problem at that
Some of
time
them
was
even survive today.
elite are not coming. Elite girls were not coming to these schools.
Okay,
Yeah?
okay,
See,
and
mostly you had the, even if you look at it in Pune and other places we've read, you didn't have elite girls who would come to these schools. Wow.
And the last question is, the how long did the school survive, and what was the name of the school? It was a Zenana school, but
Then it
what was the
became
name of the
Mehboobiya.
school?
See, today also there is a Mehboobiya school in Hyderabad.
Hyderabad. Yes,
There is, it
yes,
continues till today. It
yes,
started as a
yes.
Zanana school, then it got converted to Mehboobiya school. It is still there. It is very
It,
much
it is a famous school there,
famous
well-known
school.
school
Yeah,
there. Yes.
it's a famous school.
Thank you
I'm
so
sure
much,
they
Rekha
also
ji.
don't know the history of the school. I'm sure about that.
Uh, Thank you very much, Rekha ji. We will wait for the other half to be finished, and you come back with more information for us. And if they have
Aparna,
significant
Geraldine is there.
women's workers from
Yes.
women's leaders from that school, any women leader
Yes.
later emerging from that school will be a point to
Definitely.
note also. Thank you so much.
Yes, Jerry has a question. Jerry has raised her hand. Yes, Jerry, we are waiting
Yeah.
to hear it.
Okay. No, no, just the. Okay. Really, I love the details. And
Come on video, Jerry. Let's have a look at.
okay. Oh, okay. All right. Is it working? Okay. So, all right. I love the details. And this is what I was thinking. This is sort of around the same time, that we have other schools and we have earlier schools. I was thinking about elite schools. We have Parsi schools in the 1860s. And those are certainly elites. I mean, it's a specialized school. But I think I'm interested in the whole, like, this is the first school. I guess I read so many people that term, we are the first, this is so common, I think, where people want to claim a kind of firstness. But I think what I think is amazing about this memoir is those details, right? Where she's telling you, I love the story about the ayahs, and we have actually. I was thinking in Bethune School and earlier women's education, the European women are complaining about the jewelry. This goes on and on. We've got them talking about the girl students wearing baubles, and these are our high caste girls, so that you would get this earlier, right, these kind of complaints. I think here there's just some amazing detail about how she handles it rather than just complaining about the baubles. The details about the ayahs and carrying the books, I think those details are highly significant, because I can't think, and maybe there are other people here who know more about education than I do, could tell you if we have those kind of intimate day-to-day details from other accounts about education, I think, which really kind of help us understand. I guess I was wondering about the calling it a public school, and it's a private fee-paying school, right? Where and that was it. But I also was wondering, and again, I know you're just starting on this, whether there are also records about this school in educational surveys and so on. And I know so little about Hyderabad's archive. Whether there's another way to get at that. I also wondered if there are some obituaries of her that might, kind of help with the whole question of, did she ever marry? Sort of some other details about her. And I've just been doing some work with, like, British newspapers, which are online, and it's a really amazing. I mean, they're much better at records from these early periods. But I kind of expect, as you work on this, you'll be able to fill out the biography, right? And I was wondering, all right, and especially her association with any religious groups or missionary people, because at that church, at that time, often missionaries from India were coming back. I mean, not American, British missionaries to India were coming back and giving talks to their Sunday school, youth group, Wednesday meeting, something about their activities, because so much of, what you said about her sounds to me like things missionaries wrote at that time. Actually, also the experience of landing up somewhere and not knowing where you're going to live and not quite knowing what to do with food. And that association, I'm kind of wondering if she saw herself a bit as like a secular missionary, right? Because she's not associated with anyone. Just I think those are just questions. And why don't you ask the British Library if you could have the manuscript to work on? I mean, no,
I told
because
you the yellow table. They would not give anything from the yellow table.
oh, is that? But you might just investigate it further, because it sounds like none of this is under copyright, right? Is there any reason, you could not access for publication. I mean, somebody might. Okay, so that was a question. But I thank you so much for this work. And I just think it's going to it leads to some wonderful kind of detailed, and I think, as Aparna said, wonderful storytelling to us about those details. Yeah, I don't know, other people who are will tell me, will say perhaps whether they have discovered things with those kinds of details, and I think that's really valuable. So thanks so much for doing the work. Yeah,
And
there's
thank you
another.
very much, Jerry. I think your work has really helped me a lot because you also talk a lot about education. I think that's where we start. And like you say, what fascinated me is we hear girls' schools were started,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
school was started, but we never went into the details of the issues they would have had to face. Of course, where I read earlier in Bengal, Aparna, you all should confirm this, that initially I read, I think, I don't know, it was in your book or where, that the girls, they would have these boys throw cow dung on them when they started attending schools. And then, they decided they would leave for the school before the sun would rise. And then they would leave in the evening when it was dark so that they could easily go to school. I mean, these are some of the details which are there, but I wish we would get the name of.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. No, actually, I haven't come across these details regarding Bethune School or any other school in Kolkata, because these were girls' schools, and well, boys would not be. Boys were not supposed to study in those schools, so they were purely girls' schools, and men would be teaching in those schools, but. Well, I mean, the girls might have faced some harassment on the streets, on the way to the school and back, but within the school, I think they were protected and they did not face these kinds of harassment issues.
We had some we learned something about the Bethel school girls. They had to carry with some private, transport, so that they could reach. They couldn't walk because the Shomajpara, which was very near to Bethel school, but yet the girls had to take a hackney carriage or something like that to reach the school. They couldn't walk freely through the road.
Yes, Shanta Devi has written this in her Purbo Sriti. Yes, they couldn't walk on this, even though the school was very close to their residence. They could not walk. I mean, women would not. I mean, women would not be walking on the streets in those times. I mean, it was not considered proper for women to walk on the streets. I mean, respectable women would not be walking, but there would be buses and closed carriages for women. I mean, even Rokia had to make arrangements for these Podda buses when she started the Rokia, the Sakwat Hussain Memorial School. So transportation was a big problem, but otherwise within the school premises, I don't think women's students faced any kind of harassment. I mean,
1 minute, Jerry. Like, I was also thinking about this. You said, why is it called a public school? Is it because the Nizam supported it? See, no school could function without his support. So I don't know. Maybe
Oh,
that's
okay.
the reason it could be a
Okay.
public school.
Okay, I was thinking about like how we use the term public here, which is different than you use it, how it's differently used. Like in England, in America, public school means government supported and not fee based. And so I was just kind of thinking about that. But Aparna, thanks for just clarifying who couldn't walk in the street. Because I think I'm always thinking about photographs and things like that. Women were in the streets. It's just the respectable women could not be associated with the women who had to be, depending on what city, going to market, selling, going out to buy things, going to work as domestics, working as sex workers. I mean, there's a lot of women who were out there in the streets, and always that concern with not being mistaken for those women, right? And I think this is, yeah, why the
Wall also. There is a high
hmm?
wall surrounded the Gwethun school. That is also important because the
Yes.
premises should be surrounded by wall. I don't know whether the Hyderabad school has such infrastructure, something like that previously, but later on they should have.
Like, can I request one thing, Baswati and Aparna? You all are doing such wonderful work. Why don't we start something? Think of the early difficulties of schools in different places for girls. It would be an amazing study, I think.
Yes,
No?
yes, yes.
Because we have really not looked into that, no, from a feminist point of view. We just say schools were started, girls were coming, this is the numbers, that's all what we hear about, no? But the real intricacies, because like you were saying, there was cow dung which was thrown on these girls, and how difficult it was for them to just walk into a, maybe
Right.
yes, schools were safe places, but getting into that school would have created a lot of problems.
Savitribai Phule started her school in Pune, I think. She had to face a lot of harassment. I mean, yes, cow dung would be thrown on her sari, and she would always be carrying a spare sari to school. Yeah, yes, Savitribai Phule had to had all these kinds of very, I mean, not so good experiences. Somebody has Vasudha, please check the chat box. Somebody has written a message.
I think Nandini Jana is here. Nandini has
Yes.
written something. Nandini, can you just speak out? Can you put on your camera and speak? Nandini, please.
Okay, Wadhi. I mean,
She's gone on mute.
So please.
it's not a question actually. I was hearing, and it's a wonderful lecture. And as everybody is saying, it's so detailed, and we can know so many things actually. So thank you, Rekha ji, for this wonderful, very insightful lecture. I was just also listening to the others what they are saying about the problems of girls going to schools in the early days. And when I was checking in the Brahmo archives, I had worked on the Brahmo Samaj women and all. So most of the schools in the late 19th century and early 20th century, they had to actually keep quite a lot of money for arranging for buses. I was looking for there was this Brahmo Balika Shikhalaya school, which was founded in 1890. And I was looking at their expenses, which are quite detailed, found in the Brahmo Samaj archives. So their detailed expenses are given, and quite a lot of money actually went for arranging the buses. And once government gave them some money for buying a motor bus. So these were actually things which those persons who wanted to establish schools, they had to like keep think think about that also. So that's one thing. Just I remembered, and just that thing I just wrote down. So yes,
Thanks for sharing. I know it would be so interesting, Jerry, if Women's Conclave takes it up, and what are the issues which different regions have faced with girls' education.
Yes, that's a very, very good idea. So we could also talk about some of the early schools in modern day Bangladesh. The school set up by Faizun Nisa Chaudhuri. This was in 1876, right? So we know very little about Faizun Nisa school, but it still exists, I think. It still exists, but with a different name probably. So, so
Yes,
yeah, schools.
I think
I mean,
okay. You're making me think about all the.
yes.
I mean, we do have a few books on women's education, but they were actually this topic hasn't, as far as I can think of, received like the kind of attention. There's a book here and a book. Aparna Basu has a book on women's education, right? We've got, and then I'm thinking of some other ones that are probably in my desk somewhere in my bookshelf, but I think, I was just thinking now that I'm sure it's out there, but I can't put my finger on, say, an article on Parsi girls' education, which is really also has a lot of issues of who's going to be the teacher and what will they wear and how clothing has to change. We probably have way more on missionary education and not nearly enough on these early schools. We know about Bethune, but we really, we don't, I think, have a good grasp of these. Good topic. Aparna, you can edit a book. In your non-existent, you and Baswati, in your non-existent spare time, right? Yeah.
I don't know it.
We have to visit Library also, no? To,
Yeah, but this is really very interesting. We should
dig out
take up this
some-
project.
Yeah, I'm, this conversation made me think of, and again, like Tapati has a whole lot of really good ideas. Is I suddenly started about, and I've never been able to trace it. Nobody who works in Varanasi could help me. That when Hoimabati Shen arrives there, I mean, that's when she's just a widow, not remarried, and she gets a job in a little girls' school in a neighborhood in Varanasi, right? Where they have a male teacher, again elderly, for young girls, and they're Hindu girls, and she comes because she's one of the few people who has any education. She's in the neighborhood. She starts teaching under him, and he is very jealous of her and tries to destroy her reputation and say, you shouldn't send your girls here. We don't know. I asked people who work on Varanasi, work on that 19th century. This would have been 1881, 1882. But doesn't seem to have a name. It just seems to be a neighborhood education, very elementary. And, people say those exist. I think it's Nita Kumar who deals with this and works in Varanasi. Said a lot of these really, we can't trace them. I mean, I think, there are so many interesting topics here. Maybe we have the fragments and we have to think about how do you put them together. Rekha seems to have her hands on a real manuscript, which is quite detailed. Right. Yeah. Good topic.
Yes.
Yeah, the non-existent time is the biggest question.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Okay. So I was wondering, there's Jissy has a comment there about the names of books, but I didn't know what books the
No, this
question was
memoir,
about.
this is written under the title. If she's talking about this book, memoir, it's called Mehboobiya and My India. That's the section.
Oh, this is the book that you mean the manuscript.
Yeah.
It's okay, but it's an unpublished manuscript. It's written already like a book.
No, it's not called a book. It's manuscript. I mean, that's, I think by mistake they have asked. I'm answering, saying if she's asking about this manuscript, the title is Mehboobiya and My India.
Muted. Jerry, you are muted.
Jerry, you are muted.
Jerry. Yeah.
Yes, because I could hear a lot of overland. Yeah. Yes. No, I just didn't. I thought I would just mute because I could hear some noise, and I thought maybe it's my birds in the backyard. Yes. No, I've kind of raised my questions. Some of the questions I had, other people had already raised them. Yes, but such it becomes an interesting topic. Also, of course, the issue of language is fascinating, isn't it? and then I think, okay, I can understand why people would be against basic school education, right? Because this is what we're talking about, as opposed to education. Because there's an element of education which is about religion, then there's all this informal education, childcare, how to run a family, how to maybe keep accounts within the family. I mean, I do not think at all that women are those statistics about 1 out of a million went to college or high school. Like, I don't think we could count those. The other thing is so much about what women needed to know was practical housekeeping, right? Childcare. These are families that are well off enough where women needed to know how to tell their maids and their ayahs what to do. So I think I could understand a family saying, what's the point of this school? Right? Women are not going to get jobs. That's why men went to school.
They're not going to get jobs. They don't need jobs. That was the
well, they're not getting jobs. There aren't jobs, right? I mean, okay, maybe there's some jobs as school teachers or in the medical establishment. Those are the only decent jobs, aren't they? Women teaching women, women taking care of women's health. There's no other quite decent, respectable job for women. And then you have jobs being for the unfortunate. When you look at how people write about the women who are working, it's got like the unfortunate women, the women who've everybody's died and they're left without any income, the woman whose husband left her or something, right? And she doesn't yet have children. These are the unfortunate higher caste women, and I shouldn't use caste when we're talking about Muslims, but whatever we want to do, upper middle class kind of thing. There aren't jobs for those women. I mean, there are for their men folk, but I could understand families going, what's the point? and also worrying that think about, all right, maybe there's a lot of this writing in Bengal about these girls will be ruined, right? They won't want to do, not that they had to do physical work, but this education would make them perhaps incapable of doing the kind of work that they did as upper middle class women, right? Like ordering around people. I think the whole issue is actually, I think the question we should shift about, why did these 6 guys send their daughters to school at the time you're looking, right? Like, that's the anomaly. Those are the people who are deviating from the pattern. But gosh, I'm really pleased that you brought all this up. I have like a bunch of notes that I took while you were talking.
Really, I think I'm quoting from your book. You have mentioned a report where in Bengal, they were very much against girls' education because it was believed that, and this was something which was encouraged by the men also, that a girl would become a widow if she's educated.
I wonder, so and Aparna mentioned that. Everybody's mentioned that. I think Drinkwater Bethune mentions that, right? I mean, we can find that in some of the really old, mid 19th century reports. But that idea isn't common, obviously not among Muslims. Is it found among Hindus in other parts of India? Does anyone know? That education leads to widowhood. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, but I think, I mean, do you know why these girls were sent to school? They want them to learn English.
English, I think.
And would it be that, men wanted educated wives? I mean, that was the whole logic behind the women's education project in Bengal, no? That men wanted educated wives, educated mothers, and educated homemakers. I mean, the whole purpose of women's education was to make better wives, better mothers, and better homemakers. I think this would apply to the Muslim community as well. I mean,
no, another thing, Aparna, maybe there is a difference. See, among the Hindus, they also wanted them to interact with the British officers. These educated wives could interact with the British officers. I'm not sure if that would hold true for the Muslim girls. No, they because of the parda and all, they wouldn't allow them to interact with these men.
No, but even in Hindu families, women were under strict parda, and I mean they were not supposed to go out and interact with British men. I mean, one or two women did that, and they were severely criticized for that. Like, for instance, Ganoda Nandini, as far as I know, had visited a party alone, a party thrown by some, I mean, some British high-ranking official. She had gone alone, and she was severely castigated for that. So, but no, I mean, nobody wanted women to interact with British men. So they were supposed to stay at home, be good mothers, good wives, and good homemakers. So that was the whole logic behind it.
Maybe the Nizam of Hyderabad played a role because these nobles, they must be employed by the Nizam, and I don't know. I'm just guessing whether Nizam he convinced
Okay,
them to send their girls to school, daughters to school.
okay. But what I wouldn't, when we're talking about interacting, don't discount all the British wives who were there. So one of the things about women interacting with women is Indian women, wives of whatever, interacting with the other wives, because and that's playing into that kind of like two-person career. How could the educated wife help the career, right, of her husband by getting to know his boss's wife? So there's I mean there's connections within that, yeah, that are
Yes.
Interesting. Very interesting point.
Yes, this is very interesting. Right, right. And
and then
another thing that I found very interesting was the state of health, the very pitiable health conditions of Muslim women within the Zenana. I mean, this was true of Bengal as well. I mean, women, and both for Hindus and Muslims, men doctors were not allowed to examine Hindu women. Right. And Rokia Hossain has also written about this. And and so many women died. I mean, their lives really didn't matter to their families. So, I mean, this is all from the health point of view. Also, this memoir is very, I mean, one who's trying to write a history of women's health in the colonial context. Will also be very, I mean, will also be benefited from this memoir. I mean, because this lady, she would be visiting the Zenana of Muslim families, these elite Muslim families. So, and I think Jerry herself has worked on women's health, right, and the role of missionaries in women's health. Mm-hmm.
but okay, so one of the things I thought about was that part of the woman in Burda, it is a trope of the colonial literature. I mean, it comes into things Curzon wrote about, we are going to take medicine into the homes. I think there's a problem again thinking about elite women and thinking about ordinary women, because from what I can see, once they opened, I mean, not that they were good, but at least in Bengal, they opened these kind of people's government hospitals. Like if a woman was a poor woman, right, she'd be thrown into one of them. There was no, and they had a lot of laws about the plague, about who would be seen. And you know all this literature about the plague and women being examined. So I think I think maybe there's a whole question about who could see what kind of doctor. I also would like kind of caution about thinking how advanced medical science was in the 19th century or the early 20th century, and what kind of treatment, say, ordinary women in England got. So I think there's this way about thinking comparatively that becomes important. I am so familiar with reading like, oh, the Indian woman couldn't, they called a doctor. And I mean, it even gets reproduced in movies. She sticks her hand through a curtain, right? And he feels her pulse. But I know, like, if I go to certain doctors in India right now in 20, whatever, 26, they will feel my pulse, right? Like, that's a part. I also think if we look around 1900, there's some real questions about Western medical science as opposed to what was available, which is not just traditional medicine, and traditional medical systems, as well as homeopathy becomes very popular, right, in the late 19th century. So I've read some things that make me wonder if people weren't better off seeing Vides and, rather than like going to, quote, at that time, many of the Western male doctors who were working in like railways or anything like that were the ones with that VLMS. They had that vernacular license, which is not a lot of education, right? And we are before, in the early 1900, we don't have a lot of things that are developed in Western medicine later, right? So I wonder about whether how much of this, like, oh, we wanted to see a real doctor, we wanted to see her a doctor, and the family wouldn't prevent it. How valuable that would have been. I'm sorry, but I'm really getting suspicious about that argument. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, that's enough for me.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. This has been such an interesting session. Any other question from the audience? There's somebody from Ambedkar University who's joined, who was supposed to join. Any other question? Okay, so we have to stop now. I think we've had a very, very enriching session, and we had lovely interaction. And it is really a pleasure having both Professor Rekha Pande and Geraldine Forbes together. I mean, this is really a great thing for us. Both are stalwarts of women's history, and is really, is really our good fortune that we are having both of them together on this platform, on our Women's History Conclave platform. And but we cannot thank them enough. We cannot thank Rekhadi enough. We cannot thank Jerry enough. She has always been our support, our inspiration from the very inception of the conclave. She has been with us, and Rekhadi too, because Rekhadi had spoken twice before. I think. In the last for 6 years, I think this is the third lecture she's delivering on our platform, and we are really proud to have you all today with us. And even the lecture has been recorded by my daughter Rushoti Mukherjee. And Rekhadi, if you have no objection, we want to upload the lecture on YouTube so that those who missed the lecture today can hear it later.
Yeah.
So I hope you agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll share with you the link, the YouTube link, as soon as it is uploaded. And once again, we extend our hearty thanks to all those who have joined our program today. Thank you. You are doing so much to advance women's history. Thank you, Jerry. And Toputidi, once again, is our pillar of support. She's been with us right since the inception of the conclave, right since we started this conclave in October 2020. This was in the midst of the pandemic, and Taputidi makes it a point to attend each and every session that we organize, and she always had some very valuable feedback to share with us, very valuable comments and observations to share with the audience. So thanks, Tapotidi. Thanks for being there with us. And Nondini, Shutapa, and all the other all people who have joined. Some students of our university have also joined. Some of our colleagues have also joined, and there are many others who teach in different colleges and universities in West Bengal, and I think there are some of Rekhadi's friends have also joined this program. So thank you once again. Thanks to you, and good night to everybody.
Okay, bye.
Harsha Didi.
Thank
And also, we should thank Joysmita Rai, who's made the poster, this beautiful poster for this event.
Yeah. Lovely, very nice meeting you.
Tapotidi is also shaking her hand. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Need the names of the books mentioned. Okay.
Acha, Tapu Didi, we can see you. Tapu Didi, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Rekha ji, for the lovely article which I found on the web on this. It's a very good article, very enlightening. And there were many things which we have common both in Bengal and in Hyderabad regarding young girls' education. And the problems are sometimes the same. We can identify the problems and the effort of the lady, the about whom you have written and about whom you spoke today. Very enlightening, and this might help us to know, compare her with the early, the early Europeans who came for women's education in Bengal, and their problems and her problems, whether they were similar or they changed with times. Maybe I'll try to look into that.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Apurna and Bhashwati, for the good work you are carrying on. And Rekha ji,
It's a
I shall live a little
pleasure.
longer to hear you regarding the second half of your adventure
Yeah.
into the
Okay.
British Library
Indeed, is
and the
an
yellow
adventure.
table and the yellow table.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you, Taputidi. So once again, Acha, Babli Mukherjee, you asked for the books and the names. So, I mean, they are easily available. The names of the schools founded for women in Bengal. So you'll find them in Professor Geraldine Forbes' book, Women in Modern India. And there are many other books dealing with women's education in the colonial context. But the autobiography that Professor Rekha Pande has discussed is not yet published, and the school that she's talked about, I think not much has been written about that school
I've just
till
written
date.
an article. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you have to wait for her to write. Rekha will be writing something on the school, and we'll be looking forward to it with a lot of eagerness. Thank you once again. Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thanks a
Good
lot.
night.
Lovely evening. Bye-bye. Bye.